December 3, 2018, 11:23 p.m. Paramedics burst into the nursery of a luxury villa in Dubai's exclusive Al Barari district, summoned by a frantic call reporting an unresponsive infant. What they find stops them cold. Not the medical emergency they expected, but a crime scene that will expose one of the Emirates' most scandalous cover-ups. On the floor beside an imported Italian crib lies the body of a young Filipina woman, her skull fractured, blood pooling beneath dark hair still adorned with the jasmine flowers she wore daily. In the crib above her, a 6-month-old baby girl wails, unharmed but covered in her caretaker's blood. And standing in the doorway, silk abaya stained crimson, diamond-laden hands trembling, is Shika Amira al-Qasim, wife of one of Dubai's wealthiest developers, mother of 3 legitimate children, and the woman who has just discovered that her husband's charity case housemaid was actually his second wife and the mother of his secret child. The victim's name was Angelica Torres. She was 23 years old, legally married to Sheikh Khalid al-Qasim in a secret Islamic ceremony witnessed by 2 paid strangers, and mother to Zara, a baby girl whose existence had been hidden for 6 months behind elaborate lies involving a fictitious deceased sister and forged adoption papers. The $4 million that Sheikh Khalid had spent on this deception, buying Angelica's family's silence, constructing a separate villa wing with soundproofed nursery, bribing government officials to create duplicate identity documents, was chump change for a man worth an estimated $800 million. But no amount of money could contain the catastrophic collision of his 2 families, once his first wife stumbled into the nursery that had been meticulously concealed, just 30 meters from her own bedroom. If you think you know how this ends, think again. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us, because this case will shatter everything you believe about love, betrayal, and how far people will go to protect the lies they've built their lives upon. And trust me, you'll want to share this story with everyone you know, because the truth that emerged is more twisted than any fiction could imagine. Scattered across the nursery floor, investigators would later catalog evidence that told a story of systematic deception. A marriage certificate from a small mosque in Sharjah dated March 15, 2018. Bank statements showing monthly deposits of 50,000 dirhams, $13,600, into an account under Angelica's name. Architectural plans for the villa's extension that revealed the nursery's location had been deliberately designed to be inaccessible from the main family wing, and a handwritten note in Arabic that would become the prosecution's most damning evidence. Shika Amira's own words scrawled on expensive stationery, found clutched in her blood-stained hand. If I cannot have his loyalty, she cannot have his child. But understanding how a Dubai Sheikh's housemaid became his second wife, how a 6-month-old baby remained hidden in plain sight, and how a woman educated at the Sorbonne became a murderer requires unraveling a story that begins not in Dubai's glittering towers, but in the rice fields of Pampanga province, where poverty creates the desperation that Dubai's wealthy exploit with surgical precision. Before we go further, drop a comment below. Have you ever discovered a secret that destroyed everything you thought you knew? Because Shika Amira's discovery didn't just destroy a marriage, it triggered a murder that exposed how Dubai's elite hide entire families, how Muslim polygamy laws are weaponized against foreign workers, and how legal systems protect wealth over justice. Keep watching, because what happened next will make you question everything about power, privilege, and the price some women pay for other women's security. Angelica Santos Torres was born on April 7, 1995, in San Fernando, Pampanga, in a barangay where the main road was still unpaved, and electricity was sporadic enough that families planned their days around power schedules that determined when they could cook, study, or do laundry. Her father, Ramon Torres, worked as a tricycle driver, ferrying passengers through the province's agricultural roads for 7 pesos per trip, a distance-based fare that meant he needed 40 trips daily just to earn 280 pesos, approximately $5.50 that had to feed 7 people and cover the vehicle rental that consumed half his income. Her mother, Linda, took in piecework sewing, her eyesight deteriorating from years of stitching garments under insufficient lighting for pay calculated by the completed piece rather than hours invested. Perhaps 200 pesos for 12-hour days that left her hands cramping and her back permanently curved. Angelica was the 4th of 5 children, born into a position that meant she was neither the eldest with special responsibilities nor the youngest receiving extra attention. Just another mouth to feed in a family where each additional child represented mathematical impossibility, somehow made functional through sacrifice that ground parents down into early aging. But she possessed something her siblings didn't, a beauty that transcended her circumstances, the kind of delicate features and graceful bearing that made people pause mid-conversation when she entered a room. At 10, she was already being told she should enter beauty pageants, the path that allowed some provincial girls to escape poverty through marriage to wealthier men or modeling careers in Manila. At 15, local merchants would offer her free items, hoping she would be seen with their products. At 18, she won the Santa Cruzan Festival's Reina Elena crown, a title that brought prestige but no actual money, only confirmation that her face was the most valuable asset her family possessed. Quick question before the story gets even darker. Would you have taken the job Angelica accepted? A 50-year-old billionaire sheik offering $800 monthly to clean his Dubai mansion, with whispered rumors that pretty girls always do well in his household. Smash that like button if you think you'd have seen the red flags, and keep watching because Angelica missed every single warning sign. Or maybe she saw them and decided her family's survival mattered more than her safety. She finished only 2 years of high school before economic necessity forced her withdrawal. Her older brother needed money for vocational training that might lead to overseas construction work. Her younger siblings needed school supplies and uniforms, and the mathematics of family survival simply didn't accommodate her completing education that wouldn't immediately generate income. At 17, she worked as a cashier at a San Fernando department store, standing for 10-hour shifts earning 280 pesos daily, wages that disappeared into family expenses before she could save anything. At 19, she worked as a restaurant server, tolerating customers whose wandering hands she couldn't protest without risking the job she needed. At 21, she attended her third recruitment agency seminar, listening to presentations about overseas domestic work that promised salaries 4 times higher than anything available in the Philippines. The offer that changed her trajectory came from Premier Household Services in March 2016, $800 monthly to work as a housemaid for a prominent Emirati family in Dubai, with accommodation provided, meals included, and the possibility of salary increases for exceptional performance. The recruitment fee was 65,000 pesos, a sum her family borrowed against her father's tricycle, betting Angelica's earning potential against their only income-generating asset. The contract promised a 2-year placement with annual home leave, medical insurance, and the kind of employment security that Philippine domestic positions never offered. What the contract omitted were the details that would have revealed its true nature. The prominent Emirati family was actually one man, Sheikh Khalid Al-Qasim, 48 years old, married with 3 children, and known among Dubai's Filipino domestic worker community as someone whose household staff always included at least one beautiful young woman who received privileges and compensation that other workers whispered about but never discussed openly. Angelica arrived in Dubai on May 3, 2016, her single suitcase containing 6 uniforms, a rosary from her parish priest, and photographs of her family that she arranged beside her bed in the servants' quarters of the Al-Qasim compound, a sprawling villa in Emirates Hills where 8 other Filipino workers maintained the household's daily operations. The estate covered 25,000 square feet, containing 7 bedrooms for the family, separate quarters for staff, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and gardens requiring 3 full-time groundskeepers to maintain the imported grass and flowering plants that shouldn't naturally survive in desert climate. Sheikh Khalid's wife, Shika Amira, managed the household with aristocratic efficiency, daughter of a prominent merchant family herself, educated at Sorbonne, fluent in 4 languages, and committed to maintaining the social standing that her marriage had secured. Stop right here and ask yourself, what would you do if you were Shika Amira, educated, sophisticated, trapped in a culture where your husband can legally marry 3 additional wives without your consent? Would you fight it, accept it, or would you do what she eventually did? Comment your answer below because this isn't just a story about one woman's rage. It's about a system that gives men all the power and then acts shocked when the powerless women in their lives explode. The household hierarchy was clear from Angelica's first day. Shika Amira occupied the master's suite on the villa's east wing. Her 3 children, ages 14, 11, and 8, had bedrooms nearby, while Sheikh Khalid maintained a separate suite in the west wing. A physical separation that staff understood reflected a marriage that was functional partnership rather than romantic union. The domestic workers reported to a Filipina head housekeeper named Teresa, a 46-year-old woman who had worked for the Al-Qassims for 12 years, and whose weathered face suggested she had witnessed and survived dynamics that new employees would eventually discover. Teresa's first private conversation with Angelica, conducted in rapid Tagalog while folding laundry, carried unmistakable warning. "You're very beautiful," the Sheikh will notice. When he does, you have two choices: accept with conditions that protect you, or refuse and be replaced by someone who will accept. There is no third option where you stay employed and maintain boundaries. Understand. Sheikh Khalid's attention manifested within 3 weeks, following the pattern Teresa had predicted with depressing accuracy. Small gifts appeared in Angelica's room, French perfume supposedly left over from bulk purchases for Shika Amira, designer scarves claimed to be accidental duplicates, Swiss chocolates that other staff members understood represented courtship by a man who had refined his seduction technique through years of practice. He began requesting that Angelica specifically serve his meals, that she clean his private suite, that she accompany him on morning walks through the garden that were presented as health routines, but actually served as opportunities for conversations where he expressed interest in her background, her family, her dreams that Dubai wages could fulfill. His approach was sophisticated, not the crude demands of an employer leveraging power, but the careful cultivation of emotional intimacy that made his eventual physical advances feel like mutual attraction rather than the power imbalance they fundamentally were. Pause the video right now and subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens next will make you understand exactly how powerful men trap young women, and how those women become convinced they're making free choices when they're actually being systematically groomed. This story gets darker, more complex, and more disturbing with every revelation. Don't miss what's coming. The transformation from housemaid to mistress took 4 months of calculated escalation. Sheikh Khalid learned that Angelica's father needed surgery for a herniated disc that was making tricycle driving impossible. Within a week, 100,000 pesos appeared in her family's bank account, presented as advance wages that she could repay through continued service. He discovered her younger sister had academic potential being wasted in underfunded public schools. Scholarship arrangements materialized at a private academy, tuition covered by an anonymous benefactor whose identity wasn't difficult to guess. Each act of generosity came wrapped in expressions of concern that made Angelica feel seen, valued, and increasingly obligated to a man whose attention felt like the first time anyone had treated her as more than just another impoverished Filipina doing whatever necessary to survive. By September 2016, their relationship had become physical, conducted in his private suite during hours when Shika Amira was at her charitable foundation meetings or her children's school events. Their intimacy an open secret among household staff who understood that commenting on the Sheikh's personal arrangements was grounds for immediate dismissal and deportation. But what distinguished Angelica from Sheikh Khalid's previous housemaid affairs, and there had been at least 4 that long-term staff could document, was the unexpected intensity of his attachment. At 48, facing the mortality that middle age imposed and trapped in a marriage that had become purely transactional, he found in Angelica's youth and devotion something he convinced himself was genuine connection rather than the power dynamic it actually represented. She listened to his business frustrations with apparent interest, laughed at his jokes with what seemed like authentic amusement, and provided the admiration that his wife had stopped offering years ago when romantic love had curdled into pragmatic coexistence. For Angelica, the relationship offered security beyond any employment contract. Teresa's warning had been accurate about having to choose, and accepting the Sheikh's attention with strategic intelligence seemed better than the alternative of being replaced by someone else who would reap benefits she had forfeited through misplaced principles. Drop a comment. Is this love or survival? Because what happened next makes that question impossible to answer. Sheikh Khalid convinced himself he loved Angelica enough to marry her. Angelica convinced herself she loved him enough to agree, and both of them were about to make decisions that would destroy multiple lives. Keep watching. This is where the story transforms from ordinary affair into something unprecedented. The marriage proposal came in January 2018, delivered not as romantic gesture, but as pragmatic solution to a complication neither had anticipated. Angelica was pregnant. The news sent Sheikh Khalid into 48 hours of calculations about possibilities and consequences, his initial panic giving way to a plan that reflected both his privilege and his profound narcissism. Under UAE law, which follows Islamic Sharia principles regarding family matters, Muslim men are permitted up to 4 simultaneous wives, provided they can support all families equally. The practice, while legal, carried social stigma among Dubai's modern elite. Polygamy was associated with traditional Bedouin culture or wealthy Gulf nationals maintaining multiple households across different countries. For someone of Sheikh Khalid's social position, taking a second wife would mean social embarrassment, business complications with Western partners who viewed polygamy as backward, and the fury of a first wife whose tolerance of discreet affairs did not extend to being publicly supplanted. His solution demonstrated both creativity and complete moral bankruptcy. A secret second marriage that would legitimize the child in Islamic law while remaining invisible to everyone who mattered in his social circle. On March 15, 2018, in a small mosque in Sharjah, Dubai's neighboring emirate where officials were less likely to recognize prominent families, Sheikh Khalid married Angelica Tours in a ceremony witnessed by 2 Afghan construction workers paid 500 dirhams each to sign documents they didn't read. The marriage contract was valid under UAE law, legally binding, and completely unknown to Shika Amira, who was told that Angelica had been promoted to personal assistant and would be working more closely with the Sheikh on his charitable foundation's operations. A lie that required no elaboration because Amira had long ago stopped asking questions about the beautiful young women who cycled through her husband's private orbit. Smash that like button if you think this is insane, because we're just getting started. Sheikh Khalid didn't just secretly marry his maid, he built her an entire hidden life inside his family home, a nursery that his first wife walked past daily without knowing it existed, a baby who was hidden for 6 months in a compound with a dozen staff members. This is the part where you start to question whether this really happened or if we're making it up. I promise you, every word is documented in court records. Keep watching. The pregnancy advanced with Angelica living a bizarre double life. Publicly the Sheikh's assistant, privately his pregnant second wife, housed in a guest cottage at the far end of the villa's grounds that provided just enough separation from the main house to maintain the fiction. Sheikh Khalid commissioned architectural renovations to the villa, telling Shika Amira that he was expanding his home office and creating a new library. The actual construction created a nursery wing accessible only from his private suite, designed with soundproofing that would prevent infant cries from penetrating to other parts of the house, and featuring a self-contained ventilation system that prevented baby smells from drifting into family areas. The construction cost $400,000, billed as business office renovations that Amira had no reason to scrutinize given the complex corporate structure of her husband's holdings. Baby Zara was born on June 8, 2018, in a private clinic where Sheikh Khalid had arranged for the birth to be registered under deliberately ambiguous circumstances. The birth certificate listed Angelica as mother, but showed the father's name as withheld pending documentation, a bureaucratic irregularity that money and connections could smooth over. Sheikh Khalid visited daily, spending hours with his daughter in the hidden nursery, experiencing the early fatherhood that his 3 legitimate children's births hadn't provided given how consumed he'd been with business development during their infant years. Angelica existed in a strange liminal space, legally a wife but treated as a secret, mother to his child but unable to acknowledge the relationship, living in luxury but imprisoned by the need for absolute silence about her situation. The deception required coordinating schedules with military precision. Angelica could only move between her quarters and the nursery during hours when Shika Amira was away from the villa or occupied with activities on the opposite end of the compound. Other household staff were told that the nursery expansion housed overflow inventory for Amira's charitable foundation, and that Angelica was managing those materials as part of her assistant duties. The few staff members who glimpsed baby Zara were told she was the child of Angelica's deceased sister, being temporarily cared for until relatives in the Philippines could take custody, a lie that required creating an entire fictional dead sister, complete with falsified death certificate and fabricated family correspondence about the orphaned baby's future. Comment below how many people had to be in on this lie, because the answer is going to shock you. At least 15 staff members knew something was wrong, 8 government officials were bribed to create false documents, and dozens of Sheikh Khalid's business associates must have noticed his sudden obsession with going home early. The real question isn't how he kept the secret, it's how he convinced himself this could possibly last. Keep watching to see how spectacularly it all fell apart. For 6 months, the impossible arrangement functioned through a combination of money, fear, and willful blindness from people who knew, but dared not acknowledge what was obvious. Sheikh Khalid spent an estimated $4 million maintaining the deception, $100,000 monthly to Angelica's family in the Philippines to ensure their silence and cooperation with the fictional dead sister story. $50,000 monthly to household staff, divided among those who were paid to not notice what they saw. $200,000 total to government officials who processed the ambiguous birth registration and created duplicate identity documents showing Zara as the daughter of Angelica's invented sister. $400,000 for the hidden nursery construction, and countless smaller expenses for the soundproofing upgrades, the separate ventilation systems, the specialized baby supplies ordered through discrete channels that wouldn't create paper trails linking Sheikh Khalid to infant products. But money can't buy absolute loyalty, and fear can't prevent human error indefinitely. The deception began unraveling in November 2018, when Shika Amira's youngest daughter, 8-year-old Layla, complained repeatedly about hearing baby sounds in the parts of the house where no babies should exist. Amira initially dismissed this as imagination, then as the child's desire for a younger sibling manifesting as auditory hallucinations. But when Layla led her mother to the corridor outside Sheikh Khalid's private suite, and they both clearly heard infant crying emanating from behind a door that was supposedly locked storage, Amira's suspicions crystallized into certainty that something deeply wrong was occurring in her own home. She didn't confront her husband immediately. Decades of marriage to a powerful man had taught her that direct confrontation was less effective than strategic investigation. She began monitoring Sheikh Khalid's movements through the villa's security system, which she had administrative access to as the household manager. She observed him entering and exiting the storage area multiple times daily, carrying items that looked suspiciously like baby bottles and diapers. She noticed Angelica making the same trips, often staying in that wing for hours. And most damningly, she saw through thermal imaging cameras intended for ground security that the supposedly unused storage wing showed heat signatures consistent with 3 people, 2 adults and 1 infant-sized heat source, during hours when the space was claimed to be empty. Hit subscribe right now if you want to know what happened when Shika Amira finally opened that nursery door, because what she discovered didn't just destroy her marriage, it triggered a rage that would end in murder. This is the moment where privilege, polygamy, and betrayal collide in ways that even experienced detectives would call unprecedented. Don't go anywhere. The next part will haunt you. On December 3rd, 2018, Shika Amira waited until Sheikh Khalid left for an evening business dinner, then used her master security access to unlock the door that had been sealed for 6 months. What she found shattered the careful fiction her husband had constructed. A fully furnished luxury nursery with imported Italian crib, walls painted with hand-done murals of Pampanga landscapes that could only have been commissioned based on detailed information about Angelica's hometown, photographs of Sheikh Khalid holding a baby girl whose features unmistakably combined his own with Angelica's delicate beauty, and baby Zara herself, 6 months old, gurgling contentedly while Angelica changed her diaper and sang Tagalog lullabies. The confrontation that followed, later reconstructed through security audio recordings that Sheikh Khalid hadn't known existed in the nursery, began with Amira's devastating question in Arabic. "How long has my husband had a child with the maid?" Angelica's attempt to deny the relationship collapsed under Amira's presentation of the marriage certificate she'd already found during her investigation. The document that proved this wasn't just an affair, but a legal second marriage that made Angelica not a mistress but a wife, and baby Zara not a bastard, but a legitimate child with inheritance rights that threatened Amira's own children's financial futures. What happened next depends on whose account you believe. Shika Amira's testimony claimed that Angelica attacked her first, desperate to prevent the exposure that would destroy her relationship with Sheikh Khalid and end the financial support flowing to her family. The prosecution's forensic evidence told a different story. Angelica's defensive wounds, the blood spatter patterns showing she was struck while crouched over the crib protecting Zara, and the handwritten note found in Amira's hand suggesting premeditation rather than heat of passion response. Witnesses, household staff who heard shouting and rushed toward the nursery, reported arriving to find Amira standing over Angelica's body with a heavy crystal award. Ironically, a philanthropy recognition Sheikh Khalid had received years earlier, in her hand, blood dripping from the base, her face expressing not horror at what she'd done, but satisfaction that a problem had been permanently solved. Drop a comment about what you would have done in Shika Amira's position, because the internet has been divided on this case. Some say she's a murderer who killed an innocent young woman. Others say she's a victim pushed beyond endurance by a system that gave her husband permission to humiliate her. There's no easy answer, but there is a verdict. Keep watching to find out how Dubai's courts handled the trial that exposed everything. The police response to the emergency call revealed immediate tensions between investigating a crime and protecting prominent families. The first officers on scene recognized immediately that they were dealing with a homicide in a household that could make or break their careers. Sheikh Khalid, summoned home from his business dinner, arrived to find his two worlds catastrophically collided. His first wife in custody, his second wife dead, his secret daughter screaming in her crib, and a dozen police officers documenting evidence of the double life he'd maintained. His immediate instinct was to control the narrative. Calls to his attorney, attempts to classify the incident as domestic accident, offers to handle the matter privately through financial compensation to Angelica's family. But several factors prevented the usual wealthy family whitewash. First, the case had already been broadcast over police radio, meaning dozens of officers and emergency personnel knew about the Sheikh's secret baby before lawyers could establish information control. Second, international media had been monitoring Dubai police scanners after previous controversies about foreign worker deaths being inadequately investigated. Within hours, the basic facts had reached news outlets that transformed the tragedy into international sensation. Third, and most significantly, Angelica's family in the Philippines received notification of her death, along with the marriage certificate and birth certificate that she'd sent them months earlier as insurance. Documents they immediately provided to media and human rights organizations, making it impossible to deny that this was a legal wife and legitimate child, not just a maid and bastard baby, as initial spin attempts suggested. The investigation that followed was thorough by necessity. International attention prevented the shortcuts that typically characterized cases involving foreign domestic workers. Forensic analysis of the crime scene contradicted Shika Amira's self-defense claims at multiple points. Angelica's wounds were consistent with being struck repeatedly while in a protective position over the crib rather than in an attacking posture. The blood on Amira's hands showed she'd maintained her grip on the crystal award for at least 90 seconds after the fatal blow, a time frame incompatible with reflexive self-defense. Most damning was the handwritten note found in her abaya pocket, apparently written earlier that day based on ink analysis, containing not spontaneous rage but premeditated intent. Smash that like button if you think Shika Amira deserves life in prison, or comment if you think the system that allowed her husband to secretly marry a second wife is the real criminal here. Because here's the thing, they both ended up facing consequences, but not the ones you'd expect. Keep watching to see how this case completely upended Dubai's social hierarchy. The trial began in April 2019, after months of legal maneuvering by defense attorneys attempting to have the case dismissed, moved to religious courts where honor considerations might provide mitigation, or resolved through blood money payments to Angelica's family that would nullify criminal liability under certain interpretations of Sharia law. The prosecution resisted every attempt, recognizing that the case had become symbolic of larger questions about foreign worker protections, polygamy regulations, and whether wealth provided immunity from consequences. The courtroom itself became theater, with Shika Amira appearing in designer abayas that cost more than most Filipinos earned annually, her demeanor oscillating between stoic dignity and tearful presentations of herself as the real victim, a betrayed wife driven to temporary madness by discovering her husband's ultimate disrespect. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the marriage certificate proving Angelica wasn't a mistress, but a legal second wife, undermining defense claims that she was a homewrecker who had seduced a married man. They showed architectural plans for the hidden nursery, demonstrating the elaborate premeditation required to maintain the deception. They played security footage of Sheikh Khalid spending hours daily with Angelica and Zara, establishing him as active participant in both the marriage and the child's life, rather than a victim of entrapment. They called household staff who testified to Shika Amira's increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks before the murder, obsessive reviewing of security footage, interrogations about Angelica's activities, and ominous statements about dealing with the Filipino situation that retrospectively appeared to be threats. But the defense had powerful weapons too, cultural context arguments that resonated with Emirati jurors who understood the humiliation of having a husband's second wife, living secretly in your own home, psychiatric testimony about the psychological trauma of discovering decades of betrayal, and the undeniable fact that Sheikh Khalid had created the situation through his deception. They portrayed Amira as a sympathetic figure, educated, cultured, devoted mother, whose temporary insanity was understandable given the provocation. They emphasized that Angelica, by participating in the secret marriage, had violated cultural norms about obtaining first-wife consent for polygamy, even though such consent isn't legally required. And they repeatedly highlighted baby Zara's existence as proof that Angelica had been attempting to secure inheritance rights that would disadvantage Amira's own children, framing the murder as a mother protecting her offspring's financial futures, rather than a wife eliminating romantic competition. Comment below, who's the real villain here? Sheikh Khalid, who created this entire mess, Shika Amira, who committed actual murder, or the system that allows men to marry multiple wives while giving the existing wives zero legal recourse, because the verdict addressed only one of those questions and left the other two completely unanswered. Keep watching, you need to hear this. The verdict, delivered after 2 weeks of deliberation, found Shika Amira guilty of second-degree murder, acknowledging provocation but rejecting claims of self-defense or temporary insanity complete enough to eliminate culpability. She was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment with possibility of parole after 10 years, a sentence that human rights organizations called scandalously lenient given the premeditation evidence, but that Emirati social commentators noted was remarkably harsh for a wealthy, connected woman whose cultural context provided significant mitigation. The judge's statement accompanying the verdict walked a careful line between acknowledging systemic issues and holding an individual accountable. This court recognizes that polygamy, while legal under our religious traditions, creates profound suffering when practiced with deception rather than transparency. However, the appropriate response to discovering marital betrayal is divorce, not murder. The defendant's education, resources, and social position provided her with numerous legal remedies. Her choice of violence over legal process cannot be excused. But Shika Amira's conviction was only half the story. The investigation had also uncovered Sheikh Khalid's extensive document fraud, falsified birth certificates, forged adoption papers, and bribery of government officials to create the bureaucratic architecture supporting his secret family. He faced charges of corruption, falsifying public records, and operating an illegal secondary residence within his primary home, a zoning violation that wouldn't normally be prosecuted, but served as legal mechanism for punishment. More significantly, Shika Amira's divorce proceedings, filed from prison, sought to strip him of custody rights to their 3 children and claim majority share of marital assets based on his fraudulent concealment of community property. The money spent on Angelica and Zara came from joint accounts. The combined legal assaults left Sheikh Khalid facing financial ruin and social exile, his business partners distancing themselves from the scandal, his government contracts under review, and his reputation destroyed beyond any reconstruction. The disposition of baby Zara became its own legal battle, with 3 parties claiming custody rights. Angelica's parents in the Philippines, who were her biological grandparents but had been complicit in the deceptive arrangement. Sheikh Khalid, who was her father but whose capacity for parenting was questionable given his demonstrated judgment. And even Shika Amira's attorneys, who argued briefly that she had intended to raise Zara as her own after eliminating the mother. suggesting this showed maternal instinct rather than pure malice. The court ultimately awarded custody to Angelica's parents with supervised visitation rights for Sheikh Khalid and financial support obligations that would ensure Zara's material needs were met even if her emotional trauma from losing her mother in violence would require years of therapy to address. Subscribe if you're still watching, because we need to talk about what this case exposed beyond one family's dysfunction. This isn't just a true crime story. It's a window into how polygamy actually works in modern Dubai, how foreign domestic workers are still treated as disposable, and how legal systems protect wealthy men even when they've created situations that end in murder. Don't click away. The implications of this case are still unfolding. The broader implications of the Al-Qasim case rippled through Dubai's social structure in ways that made powerful families deeply uncomfortable. The exposure of how easily Sheikh Khalid had concealed an entire second family prompted other wealthy wives to begin investigating their own husbands with renewed suspicion. Private detective services reported 300% increase in business from Emirati women seeking evidence of secret families. The case highlighted how polygamy laws, while technically requiring equal treatment of all wives, provided no enforcement mechanisms and no penalties for men who maintained some wives in luxury while keeping others hidden in shame. Human rights organizations used the case to push for reforms in domestic worker protections, arguing that Angelica's visa status being tied to Sheikh Khalid's sponsorship had trapped her in an exploitative situation that she couldn't escape without losing legal residency and the income supporting her family. Legislative responses were modest but symbolically significant. New regulations required that all marriages be registered in a central database accessible to existing spouses, theoretically preventing secret subsequent marriages like Sheikh Khalid's. Domestic worker visa reforms created pathways for workers to report employer abuses without immediate deportation, though enforcement remained inconsistent. Most significantly, the public conversation shifted. What had previously been whispered about only in private now became open discussion about whether polygamy as practiced in modern UAE society served any purpose beyond enabling wealthy men to indulge sexual variety while maintaining respectable facades. For Angelica's family, justice came wrapped in grief that no compensation could relieve. The blood money settlement, 12 million dirhams, $3.2 million, paid by Sheikh Khalid's family to satisfy Islamic legal requirements, transformed their material circumstances but couldn't resurrect their daughter or repair the psychological damage to Zara, who would grow up knowing her mother had been murdered by her father's first wife in a dispute over which woman had greater claim to a man who had betrayed them both. Her sister Anna became an advocate for overseas Filipino workers, speaking at conferences about how her sister's beauty had become a curse, how employment contracts that seemed like opportunities became death sentences, and how the remittances that lifted families out of poverty came at prices that couldn't be calculated in pesos or dirhams. Final question before we wrap up. Has this story changed how you think about overseas work, polygamy, or what desperate people do to survive? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you're subscribed because we're covering more cases that expose the dark side of Dubai's glittering image. These stories matter, not just because they're shocking, but because they're still happening right now to women whose names we'll never know unless someone speaks up. Today, 6 years after Angelica's murder, the Al-Barari villa where she died has new occupants who likely don't know its history. The nursery where she spent her final moments has been demolished, the space converted back to the library it was always supposed to be, all traces of the hidden family erased as thoroughly as wealth can erase inconvenient truths. Shika Amira serves her sentence in Al-Awir Women's Prison, eligible for parole in 2029, maintaining to prison counselors that she was the victim in a situation that left her no choice but violence. Sheikh Khalid lives in significantly reduced circumstances, his business empire fractured by legal costs and reputational damage, his social circle evaporated, his relationship with his 3 legitimate children strained by their knowledge of his deception and their complex feelings about their half-sister Zara. And Zara herself, now 6 years old, lives with her maternal grandparents in Pampanga, attending the same underfunded public schools her mother once attended, her material comfort ensured by the blood money settlement but her emotional well-being fragile despite intensive therapy. She knows her mother is dead, but doesn't yet understand the full story, that she was conceived in secret, born into deception, and orphaned through violence triggered by her mere existence. Ramon and Linda Torres face the impossible task of raising their granddaughter to understand her complicated heritage. Daughter of a man who betrayed two families, victim of a woman who couldn't accept humiliation, legacy of a mother who believed she was building a better life, but instead walked into a trap that her beauty and poverty had constructed. The questions Angelica's case poses remain unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. How many other secret families exist in Dubai's villas, hidden behind wealth and carefully maintained lies? How many foreign domestic workers are trapped in situations where employer power extends into sexual exploitation disguised as romance? How many wives of wealthy men endure polygamy's humiliations in silence, their rage simmering beneath surfaces that privilege requires them to maintain? And perhaps most critically, how many more women must die before global systems acknowledge that sending poor women to serve in wealthy households creates vulnerabilities that employers with predatory instincts will inevitably exploit? If you made it to the end of this video, you're the real one. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment telling me what you think should happen to Sheikh Khalid, because he's the one who walks away relatively unpunished while both women's lives were destroyed. Share this story, because Angelica deserves to be remembered as more than just a victim. She was a daughter, a mother, a woman who made impossible choices in an impossible situation. And if her story makes even one person think twice about the real cost of those remittances from overseas workers, maybe her death wasn't completely in vain. I'll see you in the next video, where we're covering another case that proves the glittering cities of the Gulf hide darkness that most people never see. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, when something seems too good to be true, it probably is.